Alright, so here is the level setup I have. Oops. So, started with the DeDust level. I decided to change it from the generic, like, dusty sandstone texture that I had, because, well, I figured I might be able to work with that. I wanted to do something a little different. I wanted to try to get something that had some nice geometric symmetry to it. Um, and when I put it in here, I actually really liked how, because everything is sized so differently, and I just, as a very early level design, things were kind of shoddy and very hodgepodge in terms of how I did it. We have this crazy funhouse tessellation of variously proportioned shapes going on the texture, but um, I think that adds, that sense of alternating repetition. Um, we'll start getting into the 15 properties, that nice wholesomeness. So it also adds, I think, it adds roughness, adds a lot of breaks to everything. So basically, it has, these nice little like local symmetries that they set up, and then all of a sudden it's just like this jagged transition. Um, things are too symmetrical in various places, it tends to just all blur together. So at least here, there's all these weird like I don't even know why that's there or why it did it, but it basically breaks it up, so it does draw your eye to it. Um, I say I wouldn't call this level the pinnacle of wholesomeness, far from it, but it has a lot of interesting things that I wanted to do. So the lighting in itself, I wanted to um, basically I have it going around the entire color wheel. So this is kind of the red zone right here, and it transitions into orange as we move. Um, and this, as the lighting transitions, is really what I wanted to do. Is um, I guess it would be a sense of contrast. Um, I don't know exactly why I thought of this, but it kind of, I think contrast is probably the best way to describe it. I feel like this is a wholesome property, that maybe not separateness um, links them together. Just as we transition, you'll see that it's kind of like this gradual change, and it kind of makes it feel like it's all connected, even though all these areas just look weird. Also, there's this large, I think this is a good example of the void, because it was normally in DeDust, you're supposed to have like rooftops and other things separating it, but it really got accented when I put this entire roof piece on because I didn't want to have the skylight coming in because I wanted this nice dark enclosed space so I could have these color variants go in. But it just makes a nice kind of like void space, but also you can see everything out in the distance, so I guess that also goes into not separateness. I wouldn't categorize it as good shape. It's a weird looking shape. Maybe positive space. I feel like this is a weird example. It's like all the stuff that was shown to us in class had a lot of good sense of strong centers and scale, and everything looked very clean. And this is just like messy and bizarre, but I think it's a good way to illustrate that, you can find it in here. So, um, with these pillars, I have a level of scale basically, because not only as the pillar scaled, but so did the texture. So it ends up being that this same pattern is, warped and bent as it goes on. So there's some nice variation in there. So as we go into the yellow room, again, just kind of like just transitions a little bit from red to orange to yellow. Over here we go to green. I decided to shift things around and do squares in here instead of cylinders, just to try to like add a little bit of variation. Um, it's kind of alternating repetition of these three objects near each other. Um, yeah, and here we kind of get this same sense of like positive space. Normally there's supposed to be a lot of things up more in this vertical headspace area, but I kind of like it without it. It makes it feel um, you know, like you're getting this sense of scale in a sense of like, that everything is kind of more interconnected here. Again, I have these levels of scales for these cylinders, going for some symmetry here, try to like readjust it so it's relatively centered. Then, so there were cylinders over there and like the teal zone, and then as we kind of go over here into the blue areas, I go back to these cubes. These like little like 3 setups were mostly just done for strong centers, or at least something to draw your eye to it, because in some of these areas it's a little devoid of stuff, and not in the sense that, it's not like the void where it's mostly absence. Here it's like there's some stuff, but it doesn't, like up here I probably could have added more. But yeah, so here blue is continuing. Once again I kind of have these same little like 3 stacked things. This is like little centers, so you can kind of adds a break from these big flat wall panels. I think is the biggest eyesore. Um, Sometimes they can stretch on, but in other places I found there was enough of these breaks and transitions that I actually didn't necessarily want to put anything in it. Like now that we're back to this hallway, I kind of liked this just looming straightaway that, just kind of evokes that funhouse feel again. And then as we go over here in the center, just like at the center of the color wheel that Unreal has is white light. So I basically added, for the lights that are closer, a pale, more flushed light. So as you can see, this is like the purples, the indigos. Over here it's more magenta, but I made it like a pale kind of violet light, and then eventually ends up here in a white light right in the middle. And just like down here in the yellow, I have this pale yellow that transitions from, more saturated. And then back over here, I think there's a pale, yeah, it's a very, very pale blue, goes over here from the teal. So I just tried to give it that segue. And funny enough, right in the middle of the map here is actually this really great center. So that's like actually it would be a strong center. If I could clean up a little bit more of this and maybe reposition it. And I think that is overall, just doing this exercise has taught me a lot in the sense that setting up a level, uh, you're trying to retrofit a level, I think, is a better way, is much harder in the sense, I think, a couple of people asked if they could just make an entire level from scratch for this assignment. And at first I was like, oh, but I want to I put in all this work making a level. I don't necessarily want to have to redo it. But, if you're going in from the ground up, it's much easier to be able to implement these things. Whereas, I think it would take more time if I were to retrofit this entire level to make fit as many of these properties in here. I think it would take more time than to just build one from the ground up with all of those in mind, because I have all these holdovers of like what is this random like floor piece coming through here, with that texture. I mean, that could be an entire aesthetic that I have, is like these nice little like jagged like lines going around, but I would want that on like a border for everything, you know. But instead it's like randomly here and there, like doesn't even go through this block all the way just because of, I'm bad. But um I'd say that's certainly a nugget, is like, oh, that's awkward. That's certainly a nugget, is going through with it, building a level from the ground up with these kind of things in mind just seems a lot fresher, a lot cleaner. Um, and this level, I thought the lighting was a really simple way to make this, to try to incorporate properties of this assignment in there, without having to go and mess around and like redo a lot of the stuff I did. So I think it's another nugget, is, you know, do the best with what you have. Just because, sometimes that's all you're left with. Um, And really, just, I guess just knowing what you're working with is another good nugget. Knowing when, okay, well, what properties could I fit in here, and what properties would just be a nightmare to try to redo and incorporate everything. Um, I think that's about it. I don't necessarily have a whole lot else that I really put in here. Yeah, I definitely, all these are very good to, oh, I guess graded variation, now that I'm looking over the list again, happens a lot just with all these uh, different textures and their scale on the scale of the object they're attached to. Um, but other than that, I think there are a lot of things that, um, I could have done better with. Um, but I couldn't necessarily have learned that lesson or seen it without having to actually implement it on this level. So I think this is an excellent way to to teach that. Um, you know, learn by doing tends to be probably one of my favorites. I think it's the most effective. So, all right, that is it.